If you've ever poured your heart, your soul, and your wallet into a child only to find yourself treated like a disposable convenience, then you and I have something in common. But before you share your story, let me tell you mine. It's a story about love, betrayal, and the cold, hard math of self-respect. It all started last night, though. I suppose the real beginning was 35 years ago, the day my son was born. But last night was the end of the beginning. He showed up at my door, my son Mark. 40 years old, but with the eyes of a lost little boy. It was a look I knew well. I'd been falling for it, his entire life. Rain was slicking the concrete of my porch, and he stood there without a jacket, his shoulders hunched, his hair plastered to his forehead. It was a perfect picture of misery, and every detail I now realize was perfectly staged. He cried. Real tears, I thought. They streamed down his face, mixing with the rain, as he choked out the words I had been waiting a lifetime to hear. He was sorry, he said. Sorry for the money, for the lies, for the endless stream of crises that always, somehow, required my checkbook to solve. He was sorry for treating me like an ATM, his words, not mine. He swore he'd changed, that getting cut off had been the rock bottom he needed. He just wanted his dad back. He wanted forgiveness. It was a fine performance. It was a masterpiece, really. He hit every note, every line practiced to perfection. And I, Bill, 66 years old, a man who had built bridges and balanced budgets my entire career, bought a ticket to the show. I let him in. I made him a cup of tea, and we talked. I saw a glimmer of the son I thought I'd lost, the boy my late wife, Clara, had adored. For a few hours, I let myself believe. I let hope, that treacherous old friend, take a seat at my kitchen table. But hope, I've learned, has a nasty habit of sneaking out before breakfast. This morning my phone buzzed on the nightstand. It wasn't a call or a text. It was a fraud alert from my bank. My heart didn't sink, it just stopped. I sat up, the sleep vanishing from my eyes, replaced by a clarity so sharp it felt like a shard of glass in my gut. The alert was for a credit card. A card that had been stolen from my wallet over a year ago. A card I had reported, canceled, and long since forgotten about. The charge was for $5,000. The merchant, a high-end luxury car dealership across town. The transaction notes. Down payment on a 2023 Apex Predator GT. I stared at the screen, and the whole pathetic theater of the night before replayed in my mind. But this time, I saw the stagecraft. I saw the strings, the tears, the apology, the shivering vulnerability. It was all a lie. A cold, calculated deception. He hadn't come to my house, seeking forgiveness. He hadn't come to mend a broken bond. He came for a much simpler, much uglier reason. He came to see if the key he'd copied to my house still worked. He needed to know if he could still get inside, to find something valuable enough to fund his next grand delusion. The stolen credit card was just a test, a probe to see if the old man was still a viable target. The performance wasn't for me, it was a dress rehearsal for his next act of theft. And in that cold gray dawn, sitting on the edge of my bed, with the ghost of his betrayal hanging in the air, something inside me finally broke. Not my heart. My patience. The part of me that had been making excuses for him for 4 decades, finally, irrevocably, died. It wasn't about revenge. Not yet. At that moment, it was about survival. I had to stop the bleeding before he drained me completely dry. The ATM was officially closed. The bank of Dad was about to be permanently shuttered, and the assets liquidated. The feeling that washed over me wasn't grief. It was something colder, heavier. It was the weight of every lie, every broken promise, every dollar I'd poured into the black hole of his life, all settling in my bones at once. I'm a retired civil engineer. My life's work was building things that last, bridges, foundations, structures designed to withstand stress and time. Yet the one thing I had built with my own heart, my own son, was structurally unsound, rotten to the core. For years I had been propping him up, patching the cracks, ignoring the warning signs, all because of a promise I made to Clara on her deathbed. I remember that hospital room like it was my own living room. The smell of antiseptic, the rhythmic beep of the machines, the terrible finality in the air. Clara, my Clara, was so frail, a ghost of the vibrant woman who had filled our home with laughter. Her hand in mine felt like a bird's wing, all delicate bones and paper-thin skin. Her voice was a whisper. "Promise me, Bill," she'd rasped, her eyes, still so full of love, pleading with me. "Promise me you'll look after our Mark. He's got a good heart. He needs time to find his way. Don't give up on him." And like a fool, I promised. What man wouldn't? I would have promised her the moon. So for the next 12 years, I kept that promise. I honored her memory by dishonoring my own common sense. Looking after him became my penance, my sacred duty. And Mark, bless his manipulative heart, knew it. He knew that every plea for help was filtered through the memory of his dying mother. He played that card with the skill of a master violinist. The first big test came about a year after Clara passed. Mark, then 28, came to me with a brilliant idea. A tech startup. An app that would revolutionize the pet sitting industry. He had a PowerPoint presentation and a vocabulary filled with words like synergies and monetizations and scalability. He needed $50,000 for seed money. My gut, the engineer's gut that had saved me from miscalculations and faulty materials for 40 years, screamed no. But then he said it. "Mom would have believed in me, Dad." And just like that, my gut was silenced. I wrote the check for my retirement savings. The company, Positive Connections, folded in 6 months. I later found out the app was a cheap website template he'd bought for $99. The other $49,901 had vanished into a haze of expensive dinners, a trip to Vegas, and a down payment on a flashy convertible he couldn't afford the insurance on. I paid for that too. That was the first domino. After that, they fell with a sickening rhythm. There was the investment in his friend's artisanal kombucha brewery, which turned out to be 2 guys brewing smelly tea in their garage, $10,000 gone. There was the time he got into day trading and lost $15,000 in a week, money I'd earmarked for property taxes. I had to pull from my annuity to cover it. Each time, the script was the same. A frantic, desperate call. A story of bad luck, of being taken advantage of. And then the performance, the crushing shame, the self-flagellation, the solemn vow that this was it. He'd learned his lesson. And each time, I'd see Clara's face. He'd hear her whispered plea, and I'd give in. I wasn't helping him. I was enabling him. I was the architect of his failure, laying a foundation of unearned cash, so he'd never have to build anything himself. My friends saw it. My brother saw it. My one true friend, George, a retired CPA, who has the emotional range of a granite slab, but the loyalty of a mountain, was the most blunt. We'd have our weekly coffee, and he'd listen to my latest tale of woe. He wouldn't judge. He'd just sip his black coffee and say something like, "Bill, the boy's a leech. You're letting him suck you dry. Clara wouldn't want this. She wouldn't want you to set yourself on fire to keep him warm." And I knew he was right, but the guilt was a cage I couldn't seem to escape. The breaking point, before this final ultimate betrayal, came last Christmas. Mark has a daughter, my granddaughter Lily. She's 10, a bright spark of a girl from a short-lived marriage Mark had in his early 30s. Her mother, Cynthia, is a good woman who got wise to Mark's act early on. They divorced, but I've always made it a point to be in Lily's life. She's the one pure good thing to come out of Mark's chaos. For her 10th birthday, I had opened a special savings account, a little nest egg for her future, for college or a down payment on a car someday. I'd been putting $200 a month into it since she was born. I'd made the mistake, the colossal, idiotic mistake, of putting Mark's name on it as a cosigner, just in case anything happened to me. I thought it might give him a sense of responsibility. 2 days before Christmas, I went to the bank to deposit my annual bonus contribution. The teller, a young woman with kind eyes, gave me a look of pity. "Mr. Harrison," she said softly, "are you sure you want to see the balance?" The account, which should have held over 24 or contained $17.31, Mark had drained it. Every last penny. Over the course of 2 months, he had systematically withdrawn it all. When I confronted him, he didn't even have the champ. He was a can't-miss investment opportunity in cryptocurrency. He was going to double it, triple, the Kasopik Siba Kulf, the Korf. The market had just taken an unexpected downturn. I finally snapped. For the first time, the memory of Clara's promise wasn't enough. This wasn't about him anymore. He had stolen from his own child, from my grandma, my grandchild. I told him it was over. No more money, no more bailouts, no more anything. I told him not to call me, not to come back. I told him he was on his own. The silence that followed lasted for nearly a year. It was a hard, painful silence. The silence. It was also clear. My finances, blood pressure went down. Started sleeping through the night, without waking up in a cold sweat, wondering what then came last night. The knock on the door, the rain, the performance. He'd apologized for everything, even specifically for the misunderstanding with Lily's account. He said he was working 2 jobs, trying to save up to pay it back. He looked thinner, worn down. He sold the story of a man broken and humbled by his own mistakes, and I, softened by a year of peace and a lonely heart that missed the idea of a son, let the door to light quake open just a crack. That fraud alert this morning wasn't just an alert, it was a file and the klaxon warning of a final impending disaster. He hadn't been humbled. He'd been honing his craft. The stolen credit card, the one he'd lifted from my wallet when he'd helped me look for my lost keys a year ago, was his canary in the coal. Was testing the waters to see if I would distill an easy mark. He wasn't planning on getting a job. He was planning on getting a sports car. My son hadn't come to apologize for treating me like an ATM. He'd come to see if he could still remember the pain. I sat there on the edge of my bed, the morning light casting long shadows across the room. The cold rage I'd felt earlier was beginning to cool, hardening into something else. Resolve. It felt like steel setting in my spine. My promise to Clara had been to look after him. For 12 years, I had interpreted that as financial life support. I was wrong. Looking after him didn't mean enabling his self-destruction. Maybe, just maybe, it meant forcing him to finally stand on his own 2 feet, even if it meant I had to be the one to kick his legs out from under him. It wasn't about revenge for the money or the lie. Not entirely. It was about reclaiming my own life from the parasitic symbiosis we had created. It was about honoring Clara's memory by finally helping her son grow up, even if the lesson had to be brutal. A quiet declarative thought formed in my mind, as solid and clear as a line on a blueprint. The project of saving Mark Harrison was over. The project of demolishing his life of entitlement was about to begin. The first call I made wasn't to the police to report the attempted fraud. That would be messy, public. It would give him a platform to play the victim. No, my first call was to George. He picked up on the second ring, his voice as dry as autumn leaves. "George," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I need your help. It's about Mark." There was a pause on the other end of the line, and I could practically hear his usual "I told you so" speech, but it never came. Instead he just said, "Okay, Bill, what do you need? You need a good lawyer, or you need a shovel and a bag of line." For the first time all morning, a grim smile touched my lips. "Let's start with the lawyer," I said. "The shovel can be plan B." George came over an hour later with a thermos of black coffee and a leather briefcase that looked as old and tough as he was. He didn't say a word as I laid it all out. The tearful reunion, the fraud alert, the stolen card from a year ago, the sports car. I told him everything, all the way back to Lily's empty savings account. I expected a lecture, a litany of my past follies. Instead, he just listened, his brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished, he took a long sip of his coffee and stared out the window at my backyard, at the old oak tree Clara and I had planted when we first bought this house. The house, he said, more to himself than to me. What's the situation with the house? A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. This was my biggest, most idiotic mistake. The one I never even told George about. It's complicated, I admitted, the shame hot on my face. Years ago, right after Clara passed, I was in a bad way, worried about the future. Mark was spinning some tale about needing to show assets to get a business loan. I put him on the deed. As a joint tenant with right of survivorship, George slowly turned his head to look at me. His expression didn't change, but his eyes drilled into me. Bill, you didn't. I did, I mumbled. I thought it would give him a sense of permanence, of responsibility. I thought it would make him feel secure. It made him feel entitled, George corrected, his voice flat. It told him he didn't have to earn a thing. He just had to wait for you to die, and this whole place, free and clear, would be his. It's the ultimate get-out-of-jail-free card. He was right. It was the safety net beneath all his other safety nets. No matter how badly he failed, no matter how much he stole, he knew that one day my $500,000 paid-off house in a desirable neighborhood would land in his lap. It was the foundational error in my entire approach. So that's it then, I said, the fight draining out of me. He wins. He can bleed me dry and then cash in the house when I'm gone. Don't be an idiot, George grunted, snapping his briefcase open on my dining room table. You're an engineer. You of all people should know that for every problem, there's a solution. You just haven't been willing to look at the blueprints. He pulled out a yellow legal pad and a pen. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship is a nasty bit of business, but it's not ironclad. The right of survivorship part is the key. It means the surviving owner gets the whole pie. But it only works if the joint tenancy is intact at the time of death. He started scribbling on the pad. You can't just take his name off the deed without his consent. But you can sever the joint tenancy. It's a simple unilateral action. You, Bill Harrison, transfer your 50% interest in the property from yourself, the individual, to a new legal entity. For example, the Bill Harrison Revocable Trust. The moment you do that, the joint tenancy is broken. It converts to a tenancy in common. You both still own half the house, but the right of survivorship clause is gone. It evaporates. I stared at him, my mind slowly processing the information. What does that mean, in plain English? It means, George said, a rare predatory gleam in his eye, that when you die, your half of the house doesn't automatically go to him. It goes to whomever you've named as the beneficiary of your trust. Your half becomes part of your estate, to be distributed according to your will. You could leave it to Lily. You could leave it to me. You could leave it to the damn cat. He tapped the pen on the pad. Mark would be left with exactly what he owns, 50% of a house. A house he would then have to share with your chosen heir. Or a house he would be forced to sell and split the proceeds from. More importantly, it means he is currently, right now, a 50% owner, which means he is legally on the hook for 50% of all its costs. Property taxes, insurance, upkeep, the new roof you're going to need next year, everything. A slow, dangerous idea began to form in my mind. The plan wasn't just about defense anymore, it was about offense. A silent, brutal, entirely legal offense. For the rest of the day, George and I worked. It felt good. It felt like my old job, like solving a complex structural problem. We didn't talk about feelings or forgiveness. We talked about logistics, leverage, and legal strategy. George made a list of every financial entanglement I had with Mark. The phone bill under my family plan. The car insurance policy I paid for his rundown sedan. The 3 streaming services he used that were charged to my credit card. The monthly allowance I'd been giving him even after the big cutoff, a small amount I justified as gas money so he can look for work. It was a web of dependency I had woven myself. While George handled the financial architecture, I worked on a different project. I went up to the attic, to the filing cabinets, where I keep a lifetime of records. I'm a meticulous man. It's in my nature. I never throw anything away. For hours, I dug through old boxes, the dust motes dancing in the single shaft of light from the bare bulb, and I found them. Every single one. Promissory notes, scrawled on napkins, signed by Mark with a flourish, promising to pay me back. Bounced checks from his various failed ventures. Printed out emails from a decade ago, full of desperate pleas and extravagant promises. I even found the bank statements showing the withdrawals from Lily's college fund. I laid them all out on the dining room table. It was a museum of his failures, a monument to my foolishness. I started a spreadsheet. I entered every date, every amount. I didn't account for inflation or interest. I just listed the cold, hard numbers. When I was done, the total at the bottom of the screen made me feel sick. $427,654. Over the course of 20 years, that was the price of my promise to Clara. That was the cost of my son's extended adolescence. George whistled when he saw the number. That's your leverage, Bill. That's the cannon you wheel out if he tries to fight you on the house. The final piece of the plan was the bait. I couldn't let Mark know I was onto him. If he thought I knew about the credit card, he'd just disappear and come up with a new angle of attack. I had to let him think his plan was still viable. I had to let him walk into the trap of his own free will. That evening, I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do. I composed a text message to my son. My fingers trembled over the screen. I wrote, "Mark, I've been thinking about our talk. You were right. I've been hard on you. Let's have dinner this weekend and talk properly. My treat." I hit send, my heart pounding in my chest. The reply came back in less than a minute. "Thanks, Dad. That means the world to me. Can't wait." I looked at the message, and I didn't see an olive branch. I saw a predator, confirming the location of its prey. He thought I was the prey. He had no idea that I was the one setting the snare. The next morning, I was a man on a mission. I met with a lawyer George had recommended, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Miss Albright. I didn't give her the emotional backstory.
Way.
I just presented the facts. I wanted to sever a joint tenancy by creating a revocable trust. She looked over the deed, nodded, and said it would be filed with the county registrar by the end of the day. There was no judgment, only brisk efficiency. I walked out of her office, feeling lighter than I had in years. The Bill Harrison Revocable Trust was now a legal fact. In the trust documents, I named a new beneficiary for my 50% share of the house, the county animal shelter, in memory of Clara, who had loved dogs more than most people. My next stop was the bank. I sat down with the same manager who had helped me discover the theft from Lily's account. I calmly explained that I needed to close all joint accounts and remove my name as the payer for several recurring bills. The process took over an hour. One by one, I sat with finance stop, the phone plan, the car insurance, the streaming subscriptions, the small monthly transfer. It felt like snipping threads in a vast tangled web. With each signature, I felt a piece of the weight lift off my shoulders. I left the bank, and for the first time since Clara's passing, I felt a sense of profound, exhilarating freedom. The silence of my phone, which was usually buzzing with some Mark-related drama, was the sound of my new life beginning. I spent the rest of the day preparing my house, not for a siege, but for a reckoning. I didn't change the locks. That was the crucial part of the trap. I needed him to use his key. I needed him to walk in, full of arrogance and expectation, into a world that had fundamentally changed without his knowledge. But I did make one addition. I called a security company and had them install a new state-of-the-art system. Not discreet little cameras,
Right.
but obvious, visible ones, with blinking red lights, pointed at the front door, the back door, and the main living area. I wanted him to see them the moment he walked in. I wanted him to know he was being watched. The week passed in an eerie calm. I waited. George called once a day to check in. Anything, he'd ask. Nothing, I'd reply. It was the quiet before the storm. I knew Mark's finances were a house of cards. Without my steady infusion of cash, it wouldn't take long for it all to collapse. The call came on Friday afternoon. It wasn't from Mark. It was from Tiffany, his girlfriend of the last 6 months. She was a woman who always seemed to be appraising the value of her surroundings, including the people. Her voice on the phone was a high-pitched whine of indignation. "Bill, it's Tiffany. I don't know what's going on, but Mark's phone isn't working.
Yes.
And my Netflix just got shut off. He said it's on your account. Did you forget to pay the bill or something?" I took a deep breath. "No, Tiffany," I said, my voice even and calm. "I didn't forget. I stopped paying it." There was a stunned silence. "You? What? Why would you do that? We were in the middle of a se- We're in the middle of a se- "Bill, I'm sorry for the inconvenience," I said, and I hung up. The first tremor. I imagined the conversation between them, the confusion, the annoyance, the dawning realization that the river of free money had suddenly run dry. The panic would
Thus,
be setting in. It took another 4 hours for the main event. It was just after 9 o'clock. I was in my armchair, reading a book, the house silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. Then I heard it, the sound I had been waiting for, the quiet, metallic click of a key in the front door lock. Not a knock, a key. The door swung open, and Mark strode in. He wasn't crying this time. His face was a mask of thunderous rage. "What the hell is going on?" he bellowed, his eyes scanning the room. He hadn't noticed the cameras yet. "My phone is off. My cards are being declined. Tiffany is freaking out." "What did you do?" I slowly placed my bookmark in my book and set it down on the table beside me. I looked up at him, my own face a placid lake. "I didn't do anything, Mark," I said softly. "I stopped doing."
oh,
"There's a difference." He stared at me, his mouth agape, as if I'd just started speaking in a foreign language. He was so accustomed to my capitulation that my calm resistance was something his brain couldn't process. "Stopped? What are you talking about? You can't just stop. I rely on that. We had a deal. You said we'd have dinner." "The dinner invitation is still open," I said, "but the bank is closed permanently." It was then that his eyes finally registered the new addition to my decor.
oh,
He saw the camera mounted on the bookshelf, its little red light blinking rhythmically, a tiny. His gaze darted to the corner near the ceiling, where another one was aimed directly at him. The rage on his face flickered, replaced by a flash of pure animal panic. It was the look of a burglar who realizes the house isn't empty after all. "What is this?" he stammered, pointing a shaking finger at the camera. "Are you spying on me?" "I'm securing my home," I corrected him gently, "from uninvited guests who use copied keys to let themselves in." The color drained from his face. The last piece of the puzzle clicked into place in his mind. The fraud alert. He knew that I knew. His whole facade, the carefully constructed narrative of the wronged son, crumbled into dust in a matter of seconds. His anger deflated, replaced by a desperate, wheedling tone I knew all too well. This was him shifting gears, falling back on old tactics. "Dad, look, I can explain," he began, taking a step forward, his hands raised in a gesture of peace. "The car, that was a mistake. I was having a bad day. I wasn't thinking." "You were thinking perfectly clearly, Mark." I cut him off, my voice still quiet, but now with an edge of tempered steel. "You thought you'd test a stolen credit card to see if it was still active. Then you'd come here, using your illegal key, and find something else to steal to make up the difference. A painting, my watch, maybe some of your mother's jewelry I've kept. Am I wrong?" He just stood there, speechless. For the first time in his life, he had no script, no angle, no lie big enough to cover the chasm that had just opened up at his feet. He sputtered for a moment, then fell back on his ultimate trump card, the one he believed was unassailable. "Fine," he spat, his face twisting into a bitter sneer. Be that way, be a cold-hearted old bastard. I don't need your money, I'll just wait. You can't live forever. And when you're gone, this whole place, he gestured around the room, at the furniture Clara and I had picked out, at the photos on the mantel. This whole damn house is mine anyway. It's in the deed. I'll get the last laugh. I let him have his moment. I let him bask in the glow of his supposed victory. I let the silence hang in the air, thick with his smug certainty. Then I reached for the single manila folder on the end table beside me. I slid it across the polished surface of the coffee table. It landed with a soft, definitive thud. You might want to read this, I said. He eyed the folder with suspicion, then snatched it up. He pulled out the single sheet of paper inside. It was a copy of the deed transfer document, officially stamped by the county registrar's office. He scanned it, his lips moving silently. I could see he didn't understand the legal language. His expression was one of pure confusion. What is this? He asked, his voice a low growl. Some kind of legal trick? It's no trick, Mark. It's the law, I explained patiently, as if to a child. That document officially severs the joint tenancy we had on this property. We are no longer joint tenants with a right of survivorship. We are now what's called tenants in common. Your half is still your half. But my half, I leaned forward slightly. My half is now the property of the Bill Harrison Revocable Trust. He stared at me blankly. The gears were turning, but they were grinding. So, what does that mean? I delivered the final devastating blow. It means, son, that when I die, you don't get my half of the house. The animal shelter does. It also means that as of this morning, you are the legal owner of 50% of this property, which means you are legally responsible for 50% of all its expenses. The property tax bill is $8,000 a year. The homeowner's insurance is $2,000. The new roof we need is going to run about $15,000. So your share for the upcoming year will be roughly $13,500. The first installment of the taxes is due in 30 days. Here, I said, reaching into the folder and pulling out another document, is your copy of the bill. The look on his face was worth every dollar I had ever lost to him. It was a perfect storm of shock, disbelief, and sheer gut-wrenching panic. The safety net he had been relying on his entire adult life had just been set on fire. He wasn't just cut off, he was indebted. His greatest asset had become his greatest liability. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, the papers slipping from his numb fingers, his mouth hanging open. The king had been checkmated. He just hadn't realized he was playing a game he could lose. Mark just sat there, deflated, like a balloon that had been pricked. The rage was gone. The arrogance was gone. All that was left was the hollowed-out shell of a man who had just seen his entire future dissolve in front of his eyes. He looked up at me, and for the first time there were no crocodile tears. There was only a raw, pathetic desperation. You can't do this, he whispered, his voice cracking. Dad, please, you can't. It's already done, Mark, I said, my voice devoid of any emotion. It wasn't triumphant. It was simply factual. The documents are filed. It's legal. It's binding. He started to spiral, the panic clawing its way back up. I'll sue you. I'll force a sale. A partition action, that's what it's called. I'll get my half in cash. He was grasping at straws, at half-remembered legal terms he'd probably heard on some television show. He was trying to find a weapon, any weapon, to regain control. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. But then I remembered the fraud alert. I remembered Lily's empty bank account. I remembered my wife's memory being used as a tool for emotional extortion. The pity died before it could draw a breath. I reached for the second, much thicker folder on the end table, the one I had compiled in the dusty silence of the attic. I placed it on the coffee table in front of him. It landed with a heavy, satisfying thud. You could certainly try to force a sale, I said evenly. It's a long and very expensive legal process. And a major part of that process is called discovery. That's when both parties have to disclose all relevant financial records. All of these, I tapped the thick folder, would become part of the public record, submitted as evidence in court. He stared at the folder as if it were a venomous snake. What is that? That, Mark, is a detailed accounting of every single dollar I have given you over the last 20 years that was not a gift. It's every loan you swore to pay back. It's promissory notes you signed. It's the money you stole from your own daughter's future. The grand total, not accounting for interest, is a little over $427,000. I'm sure any judge presiding over the partition of a $500,000 property would be very interested to see that your half has in fact already been paid out to you several times over. They might even call it an advance on your inheritance. An advance you have squandered. He opened the folder. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely turn the pages. He saw the copies of his own scribbled signatures on napkins, the printouts of his desperate emails, the damning bank statements. He saw his entire history of grifting and failure, all collated, categorized and quantified. It was the irrefutable truth of his life, and it had just been weaponized against him. Just then, the front door, which Mark had left ajar, swung open. Tiffany stood there, her arms crossed, her face a mask of impatient annoyance. "Mark, what is taking so long? I've been waiting in the car for 20 minutes. Her eyes took in the scene. Me, sitting calmly in my armchair. Mark, white as a sheet, staring at a pile of documents like he'd just seen a ghost. Her gaze fell on the papers, on the bold damning numbers at the bottom of my spreadsheet. She wasn't stupid. She could read the room. The story of a carefree son with a wealthy, indulgent father was unraveling right in front of her. Mark looked up at her, his face a mess of shame and terror.
Oh, he opened his mouth to say something.
To spin some new lie, but no words came out. The charade was over. The man she thought was her ticket to a life of ease was just an unemployed 40-year-old in a mountain of debt, about to be on the hook for thousands of dollars in property taxes. This time, the breakdown was real. The tears that came were not for show. They were tears of pure, unadulterated self-pity. He sobbed, great, heaving, ugly sobs of a man who had finally, after a lifetime of dodging them, run face first into a consequence he couldn't escape. He begged, he pleaded, he apologized for everything, and this time, I actually believe he meant it. But it was like apologizing for the rain, after the flood has already washed your house away. The sentiment might be sincere, but it's utterly useless. I stood up, the movement feeling slow and deliberate. I walked over to the front door, holding it open. "The locks will be changed in the morning, Mark," I said, my voice quiet but absolute. "You are my son, and I will always love the little boy you once were. But you are no longer welcome in this house unannounced. You are a 50% owner of this property, with all the financial responsibilities that entails. If you cannot meet them, I will entertain a formal offer to buy out your share at a fair market price, minus, of course, the outstanding debts you owe me. The choice for the first time in your life is entirely yours. Now please leave." Tiffany stared at Mark, then at me, then back at Mark. A look of cold calculation crossed her face. Without a word, she turned on her heel and walked back to her car. She wasn't sticking around for the bankruptcy. Mark stumbled to his feet and shuffled out the door, not looking at me. I closed the door behind him, and as the lock clicked into place, it was the sound of a prison door opening, not closing. I was finally free. The vindication I felt was not loud or joyous. It was quiet, somber, and deeply, profoundly peaceful. The months that followed were a study in quiet transformation, both for me and for him. The desperate calls and texts started a few days later, once the reality of his situation truly set in. He couldn't pay his rent. His car was repossessed. Tiffany, as predicted, had blocked his number. He was completely, utterly alone, adrift on the sea of his own making. I didn't answer his calls. I let them go to voicemail, a string of increasingly pathetic and then angry messages that I never listened to. About 2 months later, I received a formal typed letter from a lawyer. Mark was officially offering to sell me his 50% share of the house. The negotiation was brief and conducted entirely through our attorneys. The property was appraised. His half was valued at $270,000. From that, my lawyer deducted the $427,000 he owed me, a debt he could not dispute because of the mountain of evidence I possessed. In the end, I wrote him a check for $1, for legal consideration. He was forced to sign the deed over to my trust, relinquishing all claim to the home he grew up in. The home he grew up in, the home he saw as his golden parachute, for the grand sum of $1. I hear things, now and then, through the grapevine. Mark lives in a small rundown apartment on the other side of the city. He works at a big box hardware store, a physically demanding, low-wage job. Some people might say what I did was cruel, that I kicked my own son when he was down. They'd be wrong. I didn't kick him. I just stopped holding him up, and gravity did the rest. He isn't down. For the first time in his life, he's standing on the ground. As for me, my life has opened up in ways I never imagined. The quiet in my house is no longer the sound of loneliness. It's the sound of peace. I joined a local woodworking club, and the feeling of shaping a rough piece of lumber into something beautiful and useful fills a part of my soul I didn't know was empty. I took the money I'm no longer pouring into Mark's messes and used it to set up a proper ironclad trust for my granddaughter Lily, a trust Mark can never touch. I see her every weekend. We build model rockets and go for hikes. I'm teaching her about structural integrity, about building things that last. I volunteer twice a week at the animal shelter, the one that is now the sole beneficiary of my trust. Walking those dogs, seeing the hope in their eyes, reminds me that it's never too late to find a new purpose. It wasn't about the money. I would have given him every last cent if he had just shown an ounce of gratitude, an ounce of respect. But he didn't see a father who loved him. He saw a resource to be exploited. He saw weakness where there was only a deep, abiding, and ultimately foolish love. What I did wasn't revenge. It was a course correction. I had to teach my son the one lesson I had failed to teach him his entire life, that my love was a gift, not an entitlement, that a man's worth is not measured by what he is given, but by what he builds for himself. I finally took away his safety nets, not to watch him fall, but in the desperate final hope that he might, at long last, learn to fly. So I ask you, what would you have done in my shoes? Is there a point where a parent's duty to help ends, and their duty to themselves begins? I'd be very interested to read your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, I hope you'll give it a like and consider subscribing to the channel. There are a lot more stories like this one that need to be told. Thank you for listening.